Today we're going over Akallabeth, the downfall of Numenor. If you're new here, welcome to Heart of Halfling. We're talking about Lord of the Rings and do some Lord of the Ring things. So let's get started. So this chapter begins with a quick recap. We have the fall of Morgoth, the retrieval of the Silmarils. They're now in the air, fire, and water. Morgoth has been cast out into the void. The men that were serving under Morgoth have now fled east and are becoming kings and rulers over the men that were still wandering in the east. There are a few monsters of Morgoth, Balrogs, dragons, orcs, things like that. And they are still causing havoc and casting a shadow of doom and grief over the land. The elves that traveled west towards the Valar have settled in Tol Eressëa, and here they have created a city named Avalone. And for the three houses of men, Hador, Beor, and Haleth, Eowyn and the Valar have rewarded these men with wisdom and knowledge and long life, and they are free from sickness. Now they're still have the gift of Iluvatar, they still have a death, but their lives are just extended exceedingly longer. So the Valar decide that they're going to create a land for the men and all those that remain in Middle-earth, that they're going to create a land that will be separate from Middle-earth and Valinor, though it will be closer to Valinor. So Osei brings about this land, Aule builds on it, Yavanna enriches it, and here we have Andor. The Valar are calling this land Andor. It's the land of gift. And we have the Eldar bringing flowers and fountains from Tol Eressëa. So it is a land of gift. And once it is ready and prepared, the Edain, the men, are told to follow the star, to follow Erendil's star, and the Valar and the star would guide them to Andor. And when they arrive here, the men see this fair and fruitful country, and they name it Elena, or Starwards, or Andunier, which is in Westernese, and also Numenore in the High Eldarin tongue. And this is the beginning of the Dunedain, of the Numenorians, the king of men. And the first of these kings is Elros. So during the time of Numenor, Middle-earth is waning in its light and wisdom, and it's falling back into darkness because of the servants of Morgoth. Now the Dunedain, however, are thriving in their friendship with the Valar and the Eldar, and they're becoming wise and glorious and much more akin to the Eldar and to the firstborn than to their own kindred of men. And because of this, they're becoming a people of peace, and they are growing, more powerful, but they are much more interested in arts and craftsmanship and sailing. And because of this, they will sail back to Middle-earth, and they become teachers and friends to those that still live in Middle-earth. And while they are given this desire for seafaring, the Valar are very strict and clear that there is a ban on the ocean and that they cannot sail west in an attempt to prevent their temptation for immortality. And so for during a time, the Valar remain visible to men on the island of Numenor. We have the main city called Andunier, because it faces the sunset. And in the middle of the land, we have a high mountain called Meneltarma. And on the peak of this mountain, Eru Iluvatar has made a place hollow. It's open, it's unroofed, and this is the only temple on the island, on Numenor. And from this point, it's stated that the Dunedain can see Avolane, that they are given far and keen sight, and it is through this way that they're able to still see, a point of Valinor. And we have the Eldar coming often to visit with them in Numenor and giving gifts and things, including the white tree, Celeborn, that's from Telperion. And again, because of this ban from the west, the men still travel east towards Middle Earth and are teaching the men that still live there. Now, under Numenor, Middle Earth is able to heal and grow and become more righteous and heal from the servants of Morgoth. But as the Numenorians' power and strength begins to grow, the desire for immortality also grows. So Elros lived for 500 years. He reigned for 110 years. And we have this long amount of time for peace. But by the time of the 13th king, we see this shift. We see this desire for immortality. So there's this message going on between the king and Manwë stating, why can we not go to Valinor? Why can we not have immortality? And Manwë tries to explain to them that it's not the fact that the Valar and the Eldar are in Valinor that gives them immortality. It is a part of them. It is what Eru Ilúvatar has granted to them. And that Ilúvatar has given men the gift of death. That the firstborn, their lives are tied to the land. And with that comes grief and sorrow and heartache in this long life. But with men, though they have the unknown of death, there is some relief in that. That is a gift. And so Manwë asks, who should be envying who in this moment? And Todd Antanamir decides he's going to cling onto life as long as he possibly can. And he lives, it says, into a great age, clinging to life beyond the end of all joy. Like, he becomes witless and unmanned, and he refuses to give the kingship over to his son. And that during this time, the kings of Numenor would wait until later in their life to wed, and that when their sons became of age, grew in stature of body and mind, they would then be given the kingship. Well, Todd Antanamir is kind of pushing against that and holding on to life as long as he can. But eventually we have Todd on Calamon, who does become king, and he is in the like mind of his father and the desiring for immortality. And this creates a division and a rift among the people of Numenor. And we get two parties from this. We get the party of the king's men who desire immortality. They want to, they have this loyalty to the king and to long life. And then you have the Elendili, the elf friends. They call themselves the faithful. And this party is loyal to the king and the house of Elros, but they wish to remain loyal and in love and have love for the Eldar and to continue to revere the Valar. The chapter does state that even though that these are the faithful, they cannot entirely escape what happens to their people, that they can't entirely escape death. So now we have this waning of peace and of bliss in Numenor, and we're starting to get this strife and dissent. And the people are becoming obsessed with finding a way for immortality, for a longer life. And they're also building, it says, great houses for their dead. Now the Numenorians are growing stronger and are now creating settlements in Middle Earth, and rather than being teachers and friends to men, they're enslaving them and becoming masters of men. And it says that the elf friends, the faithful, are also still coming to Middle Earth, and they are aiding Gil-galad in his fight against Sauron. So at this point, Sauron has established Mordor and has established Barad-dûr. And Sauron is seeking to gain full control of the land. He wants to be the king over men. And he hates and fears the Numenorians. And in his fight against Numenor, he is able to corrupt three of the Numenorian lords, and gives them 3 of the 9 rings of power for men. And those 3 Numenorian kings will become the ring wraiths, and they are used to attack the Numenorian settlements on the coast of Middle-earth. So now we get to the 20th king of the House of Elros, and he takes on the name Adunachor, which means Lord of the West. So he is now stealing the name of the Valar. So again, we're seeing this continue descent from grace. So now the 23rd king, Ad-Gimmelzor, is the worst enemy of the faithful. And it's during his time that he doesn't tend to the white tree any longer. It begins to decline. He enforces that no one is allowed to speak the elven tongue, and punishes anyone that is still welcoming ships from Edessea. And these ships are coming secretly, and anybody that welcomes these ships are now being punished. And Ad-Gimmelzor is also forcing any of the faithful, any of the Elendili, he's removing all of them from the main city, from Adunie, and is forcing all of the faithful to reside in a city named Romena, and for the purposes of watching them and monitoring them. Now the faithful will still sail to Middle-earth to seek out guidance and advice from Gil-galad and the elves of Gil-galad's kingdom. Now the Valar are becoming more and more angry at what's happening, because the kings are no longer tending to the white tree, they're no longer giving offerings to the Valar, and they're no longer asking for advice and protection from the Valar. And so because of this, the elves entirely stop coming to Edessea. Now there is a royal house in Adunie, and these are descendants from the line of Elros, and they are quietly loyal to the Valar. And their intent is to change the mind and heart of the king and of the people of Numenor in a more subtle manner. So they're not being very open about being faithful to the Valar. And so they're trying to give wise counsel to the king. So we have Ad-Gimmelzor, who decides, before he's king, he decides he wants to marry Lady Inzilbeth, who's most renowned for her beauty, and she is of the house of the Lord of Adunie. And Gilmelzor takes her as his wife by force. She doesn't want to do this. She hates this because she is a faithful, and she doesn't really agree with anything that Gilmelzor believes. But he takes her as his wife anyways, and they have 2 sons. Their eldest son is Inziladun, who's much more in like mind with his mother and being faithful. And then they also have a son named Gimmelkad, and he is much more like his father. Now, when it's time for Ad-Gimmelzor to give up his kingship, he would have preferred to give it to his younger son, but the law states and requires that he gives it to his eldest son. So Inziladun becomes king, he accepts the scepter, and he takes on the elvish name of old and becomes Tad Palantir because of his farsight in both eye and mind. He's a very wise person, and though the king's men don't exactly like him, they fear him because it says that he's a true seer. So Tad Palantir decides he wants to bring back the old traditions, and he begins making offerings to the Valar, going up Menel Tarma and honoring Eru-Ilúvatar. He tends to the white tree again, and through this he prophesies that when the white tree perishes, so will the line of kings. And so now we see this connection between the white tree and the kings. However, it says that his repentance is too late and that the Valar are already angry with what's happening. And Gimhilcad, Todd Palantir's brother, it says that he's very strong, very ungentle, and he takes on the leadership of the king's men. And he opposes his brother, it says sometimes boldly, but most of the time it's in secret. And it's during these days that Todd Palantir becomes the most stressed and grief-stricken, and would often seek out the Valar and would look out to the west, hoping to see white sails or even Avolane, which at this point has become veiled in clouds. Now, Gimhilcad ends up dying 2 years before his 200th year, which is incredibly young for this line, even compared to when the waning of this line ends. Like, 198 years old is very young. And you would think that with his death, Todd Palantir would have some sort of, relief and wouldn't be as stressed. However, Gimhilcad's son, Pharazôn, is even more ruthless and restless and eager than Gimhilcad was. And Pharazôn ends up becoming this great captain on land and sea and would go and be a part of the wars on the settlements for Numenor on Middle Earth. And he was so grand that when Gimhilcad dies, the people look to Pharazôn because he was a man of wealth and was often very generous with that wealth. So they were looking to him for guidance. So eventually Todd Palantir just becomes so stressed and grief-stricken that he dies. And he doesn't have a son. He only has a daughter. Now, the daughter, Miriel, by law, would have been given, queenship over Numenor. However, Pharazôn forces her to marry him. We now have an illegal marriage because they are first cousins, but he forces her to marry him, and he now becomes the king of Numenor, Ar-Pharazôn. Ar-Pharazôn the Golden becomes the mightiest and proudest of the kings of Numenor and is the 25th king. And he learns that Sauron has been waging attacks on the settlements of Numenor and Middle-earth. And Ar-Pharazôn decides that he's going to gather up weapons and supplies to go and fight against Sauron and make Sauron his servant, because Ar-Pharazôn wants to be the king of all men. So he takes his fleet, he sails to Middle-earth, and he's demanding that Sauron swears an allegiance with him. Now, Sauron is playing the long con. So he fears the Numenors, but he hates them most of all. And he decides that he's going to humble himself, be real cunning, and defeat and destroy men from within, basically. So when he comes to Pharazôn, he's very humble. It says he has a very smooth tongue, and that many of the men believe that he's being fair and wise. But Ar-Pharazôn is not deceived and chooses to take Sauron as a hostage to Numenor. And Sauron agrees with this and is secretly very pleased. And it says that within 3 years, Sauron has been cunning and charming and has now become the chief counselor of Ar-Pharazôn, or the closest counselor of Ar-Pharazôn. And that his flattery and demeanor deceives everyone except for Amandil, who is the Lord of Andúnië. And at this point, many of the elf friends, many of the faithful, are leaving Numenor in fear of their enemies because they're being called rebels at this point. So Sauron is now teaching the Numenorians to worship Melkor, to worship Morgoth. He tells Ar-Pharazôn that the Valar have been lying to him, that they've been keeping the keeping one more important than Eru Iluvatar from him, and that really Ar-Pharazôn should be serving Melkor, who is the Lord of all and the giver of freedom, and that he will make him stronger than the Valar can. So Ar-Pharazôn is now worshipping Melkor. And at first, it's done privately and in secret, but eventually it becomes more and more open. And in here we have Amandil, who is a counselor of the king, urging the king to, come back into reverence with the Valar, to be faithful to the Valar. And Sauron hates this. He hates Amandil, and he tells Ar-Pharazôn that he needs to get rid of Amandil. He needs to dismiss him for his counsel. And he tells Ar-Pharazôn that he needs to cut down the white tree. So Elendil, the son of Amandil, and his son hear about this. So we have Amandil, Elendil, and Isildur, Elendil's son. They all hear about the cutting of the white tree. So Isildur decides he's going to disguise himself, and he's going to go to Ar-Pharazôn's court and steal from the white tree, from Nimloth, and try and save the tree. And in this endeavor, Isildur manages to take a fruit, but he is greatly wounded in this attack. But he's able to escape to Romena and gives the fruit to Amandil, who plants the seed in secret. And as soon as it sprouts and the first leaf is grown, Isildur is completely healed. And after this theft, Ar-Pharazôn cuts down the tree, gives it to Sauron. Sauron has now built this large temple on Numenor. It's this large, round temple, and on the top of it is this silver dome. And Sauron is using Nimloth, using the white tree as fuel to burn blood sacrifices to Melkor. And so this once bright silver dome is now being filled with black smoke from all of these sacrifices. And many of these sacrifices are the faithful. They're taking the faithful as prisoners, as victims, and are sacrificing them to Melkor. And so it says that though the men of Numenor are free from sickness, they're now being plagued with illness and madness. And Sauron's influence on them is making them more violent, quick to anger. They're enslaving the men of Middle-earth. They're killing them on the altar for Melkor. And Ar-Pharazôn is growing old and is now becoming fearful of his impending death, right? And Sauron is convincing him that the only way for him to become mortal is to go to Valinor and to basically take from Valinor, to become immortal and to become the ruler of the Valar. Amandil hears of this plan and tells Elendil that he's going to go secretly to Valinor. He's going to take 3 mariners and they're going to sail off to Valinor in the hope to once again plead for aid and forgiveness from the Valar. However, it says that the mercy from Manwë and the Valar will not come again for them, will not come again for men. And Elendil worries about what is going to happen to the house of Andúnir if Ar-Pharazôn finds out that Amandil has left. So Elendil now begins to prepare ships to flee from Numenor. And before leaving, Amandil instructs Elendil and Isildur to not interfere in the war of Numenor, and to find a place for the faithful to reside. And so Amandil sails west. It says that nobody knows what exactly happened from them, if he ever made it to the Valar. It's entirely unknown. We never hear of them again. But we do know that a second petition from the Valar was not going to save the people of Numenor. So now Elendil and the faithful are preparing to leave, and they're filling up their ships, they're getting supplies ready, and they're getting, treasures and things ready, including the white tree. And now we have a change in Numenor. The climate has changing. It's now becoming exceedingly dark and stormy, and that Manwë's eagles were bringing lightning and thunder, and they were striking the temple of Melkor. And so Sauron is telling them, like, look, the Valar are making the first move. They're making the first strike. But the eagles are constantly just hitting Melkor's temple. And in seeing that Sauron isn't being affected by these lightning strikes, the people are now treating him like a god. So Ar-Pharazôn, now believing that the Valar are striking against him first, is now creating a fleet to break the ban and to sail towards Valinor. And it says that Ar-Pharazôn's fleet is able to reach Tol Eressëa, that he sees the beauty of the island. He gets to Aman, he goes to Tuna, he sees the glory of this, and none of this is stopping him. And that the people, that the Eldar in Tuna have now fled to Valimar. They're fleeing towards the Valar. And Ar-Pharazôn believes that he's now going to be able to be king and everything. While Manwë at this point is seeking the counsel of Ilúvatar on what to do, on how to proceed. So Ilúvatar now changes the shape of the world. And it says that a chasm opens up in the sea, and that here we have the real division between Valinor and Middle Earth, and that at the edge of this division, at this chasm, is where Numenor lied, and so it's now being sunken into the sea. And that Ar-Pharazôn and his men in Valinor are being buried under the fallen rocks, and that it's believed that they are imprisoned in the caves of the Forgotten until the last battle, the Day of Doom. So Ilúvatar is now sending massive waves to destroy the island, destroy anything in between. And that Miriel, it says that she is attempting to get to the peak of Meneltarma, but that a large wave comes in, and it's so loud that nobody can hear her screaming, and she falls with Numenor. And that here we have basically the drowning of islands and the reveal of new islands on the coasts of Middle-earth. And Valinor and Tol Eressëa are entirely removed from Arda and are taken into the realm of hidden things. So now the foundation of Numenor is completely destroyed, completely gone. Everyone in the land has fallen into the sea. And it's unclear whether Amandil was able to reach Valinor, if Manwë had heard his prayers, and through this decided to spare Elendil. But Elendil and his people, we have 9 ships. Elendil had 4 ships, Isildur had 3, and Anarion had 2. And they were able to flee before the destruction. And they're able to reach Middle Earth, and will find and create new kingdoms there. And it says that in these kingdoms, there'll be a knowledge and craft that only echoes what Numenor was before the influence of Sauron. So Sauron, during this time, was sitting in his temple, laughing. It says he laughed 3 times. And he thinks that he's totally fine. He doesn't expect the Valar or Ilúvatar to destroy Numenor. And that when he laughs the 3rd time, the temple falls into the sea. And that even though he is robbed from his physical form is completely destroyed. He is still a Maiar, though, and so his spirit escapes to Barad-dûr, and it's there that he takes on a new shape in this shadow of destruction and corruption, and takes on this hideous form. So after Numenor is completely destroyed, the men call this Akallabeth, the Downfallen, or Antalante. And legend says that Numenor's sacred mountain, Meneltarma, might have rose again, that it may not have been entirely undersea. And so there are many of the Dunedain that try to seek out the mountain in hopes that maybe if they get to the peak of it, maybe they could see a vision of Avalone, of what was maybe. However, no one is able to ever see or ever find Meneltarma. And instead, it's at this point that the Dunedain are realizing that the world is now round, that they can start at this point and they're going to end right back where they were, and that the roads are now bent. However, the elves are still permitted to travel to Valinor and Tol Eressëa, and this leads men to believe that there's a straight road and that must still exist, that there's some sort of bridge between Middle Earth and Valinor. And it says that some men have accidentally been able to find this path and have seen Valinor before their death. But otherwise, it's believed that the Valar are still able to watch Middle Earth and keep an eye on them while still being separate. So here ends the downfall of Numenor. This was a long chapter. Thank you guys for hanging on. We've got one more section, the Rings of Power, and then we'll be done with the Silmarillion. But we've got lots more coming along after that. So I hope you guys stick along. I hope you guys have a wonderful, blessed week, and may your homes be filled with food and cheer. Bye.